Hey, everybody. I'm Bruce Martin, and welcome to episode one of Why I Left Giant Church Incorporated. And my friend
Marie Griffith.
is here to talk about that whole issue. Marie wrote a series of blog posts earlier this year called Why I Left Giant Church Incorporated. I found them to be very convicting personally, but of all the blog posts that you've done over the years, this one has gotten more interaction than any other one. So.
Sure.
Maria and I thought it might be a good idea for us to come together and talk about the problem at Giant Church Incorporated from two different perspectives. I'm a pastor. I was a pastor for 23 years. I have not been pastoring in a local church for the last 3.5 years, but I know a lot about church world. In fact, one of the churches that I was a part of leading for 3.5 years was a mega church. Maria, talk about your story and what led you to do this whole series of blog posts.
So I know a lot about the church world also, but from the other side of that, the congregant, I also served on staff at a church for about 10 months. That's how I know about church world.
Yeah, you know from both sides.
I do know from both sides, but not as a pastor. But I write this because through my Giant Church experience, I realized that a lot of us are following Giant Church Incorporated, and really it's stolen the place of Jesus in our lives.
Yeah, it's kind of hijacked the gospel in that sense. And
Yes.
so and I've been guilty of this, but we start building a brand. We start building what I call an empire inside the kingdom, and we don't realize that it often is taking people outside the kingdom. So the big why about writing Why I Left Giant Church Incorporated is to tell your story, but also to help people understand what?
I want to point them back to Jesus.
Yeah.
And to show them that following Giant Church Incorporated and doing all of the things that Giant Church Incorporated tells us to do is not the same as following Jesus.
Right. And one of the reasons that I'm doing this podcast with you is because I have been part of the problem before as a pastor, and I know the pull toward creating a brand around Giant Church Incorporated. Let me ask you this question: is Giant Church Incorporated? We're using that as a moniker, but is that limited only to mega churches? When you say Giant Church Incorporated, what does that mean to you?
It means several things. I do unpack that in one of the posts, but all mega churches are not Giant Church Incorporated.
Okay.
There are some really good mega churches out there. A Giant Church Incorporated is any kind of church using different tactics to build a following or a brand, and that can be a church of 100.
Yeah.
Where really they're not leading people to follow Jesus. It's more about a business or brand, like you said,
or even following a person. Because often that brand is subtly or not so subtly built around a person, often the pastor or pastors. So often a Giant Church Incorporated is led by a very charismatic, sometimes autocratic, very authoritarian male pastor, or sometimes it's led by a husband-wife team. More and more. And this is, again, where my story intersects this. I remember all the way back in the 1990s when I was in the printing industry in those days. This is before I'd even become a pastor, but I remember visiting a very large megachurch back in the day. And I remember thinking, I want to be like this person that I saw on stage, because there was thousands of people in the audience, and they were all listening with rapt attention to this person. Now, and here's where it gets so difficult. I had this desire to not only follow Jesus, but to help others follow Jesus. But for me, if there was a dark underbelly to the church growth movement, it was what happens in the heart of the pastor and how that begins to affect the hearts of the people that person might be leading. So as we go further into these episodes, I'll tell more of my story honestly, because there was an upside to my story, and particularly in the first church that I led, but there was also a big downside that at the time I wasn't even aware of. So we're doing this podcast to help people understand that there's a potential problem, and in two words, what would you say that problem was?
2 words.
Well, here's the thing. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of 2 words. It's spiritual abuse.
It is.
And
yes.
most often, here's what's scary about it. If someone's being physically abused, they typically know it. If someone's being sexually abused, they typically know it. But a lot of people are being spiritually abused, no idea.
I don't know.
And so
We didn't know.
You didn't know. And you've been a believer for a long time.
A long time.
Would you describe yourself as a fairly mature believer?
Yes.
And yet, how long were you a part of Giant Church Incorporated?
8 years.
Yeah.
All in too.
All in.
All into it.
So, I mean, it's quite a story. So our hope is, as listeners and as viewers, you might see part of your story in this. And here's what I would tell you: there's a temptation when we're a part of any church to put on rose-colored glasses and see everything through those glasses. But as one person said it really well, if you're wearing rose-colored glasses, red flags look just like flags.
Yeah.
In other words, there's not an alert or a warning. Oh, this is a potential problem. So going back to your series of blog posts, we understand a little more now why you wrote that, and we want to help people understand there's a problem of spiritual abuse. And I'd like to help people begin to see what are the signs of spiritual abuse, so that they can go, oh gosh, I'm experiencing that. But I want to make it real. I want to bring it real close to home. The blog post series was called "Why I Left Giant Church Incorporated."
Yeah.
Why did you leave after 8 years? Why did you leave Giant Church Incorporated?
Well, I'll start it out like I started out the series. My husband came home one day from a meeting at the church. It was a men's gathering.
Okay.
And proceeded to visibly be bothered about something. I could tell he was bothered about something. And
spouses, we kind of know that, don't we?
I kind of knew it. And I ignored it for as long as I could, but then finally pressed him to tell me why he was bothered, because this was unlike him. He wasn't a person that was bothered easily by these kind of things. So I pressed him to tell me, and he finally shared something that was said during the men's gathering by the pastor. And when he told me, a lot of emotions came over me, but the one I remember the most was relief. And that may sound strange to you, but relief, because I had already been processing some things, some red flags alone for a few years. I had just not said anything to him about that.
And why did you not say anything? Because this is part of your story. Yes,
it is. I didn't say anything. There are several reasons, but I'll get to the main one. First of all, I didn't want to believe it. You know, some of the problems that I was seeing within the church. I mean, I love these people.
Sure.
I was in small groups with them. They were, our kids were best friends. All these dynamics were going on where, you don't want to see and you don't want to believe this. But another reason is, for years I had prayed that my family would go to church together. Yeah. This was the first place we ever did that.
Yeah.
My husband started going to this particular church with the kids and I a year after we started going, and joined small groups, got into the men's ministry.
So he was there for seven of those 8 years, really?
Yes.
Wow.
He was there for 7 of the 8 years. And
super involved, and he was on ministry teams and everything. He was on
ministry teams. We led small groups together. I didn't want that to end.
And I think, this is where I think it intersects a lot of people's lives. Their kids are involved in a children's program. And so even if they're hearing some things from the stage that they're not very comfortable with, or like, oh, that doesn't sound right, or gosh, that doesn't really sound like Jesus, but their kids are having a great time, or their youth group is really growing, and their kids love the youth group. And I tell you, there's a lot of times that even as parents, we'll defer to our children. And so even if we're seeing some red flags, if we're like, hey, I'm not sure about this, or I'm concerned about this, if our kids are enjoying it, or if our teens are enjoying it, there's a degree to which we just want to minimize those things or ignore them or put up with them. Mm-hmm. But you guys finally reached a point, and for you, it was that moment when your husband said to you, I'm concerned about something.
And yes, so that opened the floodgates of me telling him the things that I had seen. And we just sat on the porch that day and we talked for an hour and a half.
And you remember what he said?
Oh yeah,
immediately?
He said, after I got through telling him all the things, he said, "Well, we can't leave, Marie."
Yeah, think about that. Their family had been so engaged in the church, the idea of leaving was almost impossible to fathom.
Impossible. I wasn't even thinking about it then, to be honest.
But the things you were saying caused him to think, "Oh my goodness, she
Right.
might be talking about we need to leave."
I mean, for him to say that, he obviously thought these are major issues, but we can't leave, Marie. I mean, because we could not imagine. I mean, our lives were so involved in the church. So it was just hard for us to see at that point. But the more we opened up to each other about it, the more we realized that we had to. We had to leave because we realized we were part of the problem. And before we left, though, we met with some friends that had left before us, and we'd never had the conversation with them. We'd never asked them and sat down and said, "So, tell us what happened."
Do you think there was a part of you that didn't want to know?
I think there was a part of us that did not want to know, but the mostly it had to do with this silence that is just it's a rule in Giant Church Incorporated. When you leave or you have a criticism for Giant Church Incorporated, you don't say anything.
You don't say anything.
You do not talk about it because it's considered gossip.
Okay.
And so the leavers, the ones who had left previous to us, they obeyed that rule. We obeyed the rule by not asking. And
so they left quietly and you didn't ask.
And that's part of it. You leave quickly and quietly.
Okay.
That's how you leave Giant Church Incorporated.
Okay.
Yeah.
So after you talked to this family, what did you think?
Oh, we talked to several families.
Several families. Okay.
Not just one. And actually Johnny ended up meeting with two that I didn't ever talk to, but they were
Johnny's
friends.
your husband.
Yeah, Johnny's my husband. Yes. So he ended up meeting the two individuals, the men.
Yep.
And talking about why they left, and he was his eyes were just fully opened, my eyes were fully opened, and we apologized to those families. We apologized to our friends for not asking them. Now we stayed in relationship with them, but at a not intentionally, but because our life was involved in Giant Church Incorporated, their lives were no longer. That relationship sort of it just became not as, I don't want to say not as important, but we just didn't have as much time to invest in them because all of our time was invested in Giant Church Incorporated.
So here's one thing that's interesting about your story. And some of this is because you're a communicator and you're a writer. I mean, she's a blogger. So part of her gift is communication, but it's interesting to me that you guys didn't leave quietly exactly, because you took time to sit down with the pastors.
Yes, we did.
And you wrote an at-length letter. And you met with them face to face.
Yeah, we met with them.
Can you talk to us just about what were the core issues? The reason I wanted to go through some of these core issues that they dealt with at Giant Church Incorporated is because if you are seeing the same things in your church, I don't want you to ignore those things or think that that's just normal or that's just the way it is. If you have questions about something, it's important that you ask those questions. So when you sat down with your pastors, which were husband and wife team leading Giant Church Incorporated, what were the key things that you shared with them that you had concern about?
Well, and I eventually get to this in my blog series, but in the letter, we were very honest. We told them that the teachings had become more prosperity gospel, which we did not believe in.
Yeah. A prosperity gospel, the idea that God's primary goal is that all of us are healthy and wealthy and prosperous, circumstantially, materially, and otherwise.
Yeah, they started teaching some strange things about the Jezebel and Ahab spirit, which I knew the story about Jezebel and Ahab.
You didn't know they had like specific spirits.
I didn't know they had spirits.
that were still running around wreaking havoc.
We were concerned about that. And there were other issues that we named. Those were the two main ones. Because what they were doing too with the prosperity theology and the Jezebel, we started seeing that people were labeled like if you weren't prospering, then you must not have enough faith. If you were questioning Giant Church Incorporated or any of the decisions they made or leadership, a woman would be called a Jezebel, or that she had a Jezebel
dissension,
spirit.
You're sowing discord.
Mm-hmm. And so I put the letter on, or I put a large excerpt of the letter on in my first post to give you more of an idea, because I can't remember all of the reasons we listed in the letter. But I can tell you this: we did not name everything because we didn't know what it was called at this point. You just got to understand. We knew something was wrong. We just didn't have a name for it.
And it's interesting. It started for you, and I'm not surprised, but it started for you with some theological things that were going sideways. Mm-hmm. It started with your husband on the way some things were framed about people.
Oh, yes.
Interestingly enough, how people were, in other words, people were in Giant Church Incorporated were seen as either an asset or a liability.
Yeah.
And if you're a liability, then we don't have time or interest. If you're an asset, then we want to put you to work and get you to steward the spiritual gift that God's given you, so that Giant Church Incorporated can become gianter. Yes, Mom, I know that's not a word, but that's the idea. So it's interesting. You were both responding to, I've got concerns about this. His concerns were on this relational side of how people were being talked about, or treated.
Yes.
And you are on the side of theologically, I think they're going a little sideways with this prosperity teaching and what is this Ahab and Jezebel spirit and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I want to say this too. It's true. Giant Church Inc., they see people as either assets or liabilities. You're either useful to the organization or you're not. And if you're not, they will try to shape you and form you into being useful.
Okay.
So they will tolerate some liabilities, but
you better get turned into an asset sooner or later.
If you don't turn into an asset, they keep seeing you as a liability, and eventually they have their own way of doing away with you.
Yeah. And here's where my heart gets broken because of my own sin. You know, I can look back at the very first church that I started, Rocket City Community Church, back in 1995. And I remember it was subtle. It's almost like an implicit bias, something that's running in the background. But as a pastor, often we'll see people and we'll see, are they charismatic? Are they extroverted? Are they outgoing? Are they wealthy? Are they tithers? Do they have leadership gifts? And there was
where
not
where do
they work?
What is their status in the community?
What is their networking ability? All of those things. And here's the thing: all of those things went through my mind when new people would come to the church. And there were seasons in my worst moments, Marie, where I would see people in that asset or liability column. What is so heartbreaking about that? You realize that Jesus over and over and over again was drawn to what the world would consider a liability. The leper, the blind, the demon possessed, the crazy, the least of these. And of all the things that we've talked about today, that's been the most convicting to me as a pastor, because like I said, I've been part of the problem. I was in the local church for 23 years. I had good moments where I think I was following the way of Christ well, and I was leading others to do that. But in my worst moments, I also there were aspects of spiritual abuse in my own leadership, and I wasn't even aware of it. How I would get people to do something. In other words, sometimes even using my charisma or my likability to get people to do things, to get people to follow a certain agenda, to the temptation to build teams around me that wouldn't ask questions and wouldn't be difficult. That was just part of my story. And there was a degree to which I found myself sometimes irritated or frustrated if I had a person that was just asking a lot of questions, because it was like, I'm just like, trust me. And I will say from experience and also from observation, if a pastor ever says just blanketly trust me, run, don't walk.
Or if they say I'm God's anointed.
Oh yeah, touch not God's anointed. That's a favorite Old Testament one. If those are the kind of things, you should not only see red flags, but you should have red lights going off in your head, and you should hear a siren in the distance, because it's a way that an autocratic giant church leader keeps other people from asking questions.
Yeah.
I'm the spiritual leader. Don't question me, or you're a bad person, or you're thwarting God's work, or you're diminishing the work that God's trying to do in our congregation. Mm-hmm. So even when I think back to those days, it just makes me sad. Mm-hmm. Because I'm still in this learning journey of recognizing that Jesus came to bless the least of these. It's interesting when he introduced his ministry on planet Earth, he said, I have come to preach good news to the poor, to release the captives, to open the eyes of the blind. He would say things like, blessed are those that are poor, blessed are those that hunger and thirst for righteousness. And even the disciples that he chose, in a lot of cases, would be seen as liabilities. Mm-hmm. Some fishermen, the tax collector, that was a big problem. Simon the Zealot, which is just, so here's a guy that's wanting to violently overthrow Rome. I can't wait to see how The Chosen in their movie thing depicts him on that one. And then you got Thomas, who just seems skeptical about the whole thing. Of course, interestingly enough, Jesus never said, oh, forget it, Thomas.
Right.
You're a liability. No. I'm tired of all the questions. Thomas
was so tender with him.
He was. And then there was Judas and the other Judas. Apparently there was two of them. Anyway. So as we're kind of wrapping up this first thing, kind of what I wanted to tell people is this. If you wonder, gosh, I wonder if I'm a part of Giant Church Incorporated, or I wonder if there's spiritual abuse that's going on in our setting, I want to say this. If you're feeling or sensing some red flags in your spirit about some things, whether on stage or behind the scenes that you come to know about, don't dismiss those. It's important that you ask questions about those things. And again, you're looking for a person that's humbly saying, hey, let me answer those questions. Because sometimes we misunderstand things. Certain things have been said, or I heard it a certain way. But when you start getting pushback about not asking questions, or you're just a troublemaker, or I'm the authority and you have to obey me no matter what, friends, that's a problem.
Yeah. And let me tell you what they will do is say, well, the reason you're having questions is there's some kind of sin in your life.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding me.
No.
Oh, yeah. That's so awful.
No, that's one of their tactics. And
so if you're asking questions, this is called flipping it. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna flip the script. Mm-hmm. Oh, the problem can't be here. We're gonna deflect any attention from our problem. Yes. We're gonna flip the script. Oh, you must have sin in your life. You wouldn't even be asking this question, except you're a completely immoral person.
You have a problem with authority. You're Jezebel or Ahab or...
I can't wait to study this whole Ahab Jezebel thing more. I thought I knew the story too.
Well, we know the story, but they've done something else with it.
They've developed something.
I want to do two more things. Okay. Read Wade Mullen's definition of spiritual abuse.
Wade Mullen.
And if you don't know Wade Mullen, look him up. He did his... dissertation on this whole image management by evangelical organizations and how that works. It's like a 200 and something page paper with all kinds of resources. I have it. I've downloaded it. Okay. You can download it for free. Just look it up.
Okay.
But anyway, he's been on different podcasts talking about the different tactics of spiritual abuse. So I'm going to read that, but I also want to say one more thing.
Wade Mullen, WadeMullen.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Follow him on Twitter too. He always has great Twitter threads. But I wanted to say this too. My sister is Bruce's wife.
Bless her heart.
And when I was going to Giant Church Incorporated, she had her own red flags. But she resisted saying anything to me because she was I guess jealous of the relationships I was forming with other people. So she thought that meant she could never talk about the red flags because she doubted her own
Oh,
voice.
Yeah.
She doubted the reason why she wanted to say something. So she couldn't,
interesting.
she had a hard time sorting it out. Like, am I just jealous? She thought she was jealous. I mean, we have a very close relationship, but I look back on it now. That wasn't jealousy. She was concerned,
She's
but she
concerned.
doubted herself and thought, am I just jealous or are these valid concerns? So,
And one of the things that Giant Church will do is make you doubt your concerns.
yes, they make you doubt your concerns.
It's
and
gaslighting. We'll talk about that in another
we will.
episode.
But they want you to not be as close to your family.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay, that's a whole nother
That's a
episode
whole
too.
nother issue too.
Um,
So they welcome to the family was one of my posts. It's called Welcome to
Mhm.
the Giant Church Inc. family.
Yep.
They want to be your family. They want you all in, and so that you're not relating to other people, because they can best use you that way, and you don't have other voices speaking all these concerns. So that's another way that you can watch out for
okay, so
Giant Church Incorporated.
I want to finish with a confession and then a question for you.
Okay.
So my confession is, when I would see some things, because I knew this church that she was a part of, and I would see some things about that church that I thought were a little wonkus. But because I knew Marie was a mature believer, she'd been
Right.
walking with Jesus for a long time. I didn't ask very many questions about it. I didn't dig in there because I'm like, hey, Marie, if there's a real problem going on, Marie's going to see it. It's not going to be a problem. And I realized certain things that I had questions about. I didn't even pose those questions because of what I believed about you. She's a mature believer. She's able to discern truth from error. Her whole family's going together. It's great. And so that's my confession. I even dismissed some concerns that I had about the church that I probably should have asked her about in more detail.
Yeah.
So here's the question for you, and if you can answer it. In the seasons, particularly in that Rocket City Community Church, because you were a part of that church and you were on the leadership team of that church. In fact, you were a founding member of that
Mhm.
church. Did you ever see times with me, because I was not only your brother-in-law, but I was your pastor, where you said, hey, I'm not sure about that, or I wonder about that, but you didn't ask me about it?
I've thought about that because I was part of the founding team.
Yep.
And we've talked about this. The only thing that the group of us and as Rocket City Community Church grew, I mean, I became very prideful and thought, well,
Yeah.
I really did. So
we were so proud of
can be
ourselves.
kind of a spiritual abuse, even though I hope we did not project that kind of pain on people. But I felt like we were special. We
like
had
the
God's
inner circle. No. Like, okay, finish that.
No, like we had gotten it. Like God's revelation
Oh, yeah.
had come to us, and we were doing the contemporary church services. And you see what I'm saying?
She said that, friends.
Yeah, I said that.
Not me. I thought that in my heart of hearts.
I did.
No, but you just called it out.
I did.
There was
I thought
times
we had it.
Yeah.
Like, and I would look around. Why aren't these other churches getting it? Don't they realize?
To give you some context, Rocket City Community Church was sort of a seeker-oriented, maybe even seeker-driven model, if you want to use that. I mean, contemporary music, and I was up there. This is back in the '90s, people. So I would teach in jeans and a t-shirt, and that was considered scandalous.
Oh my gosh!
gosh!
Wear what we wanted.
And it's interesting. It created its own kind of pride.
It did.
We became, stay with me, we became a new breed of Pharisee.
Yeah.
Oh, we're not like those Sadducees, those traditionalists over there, just doing the Torah. No, we've got God's, like you said, we've got God's new revelation. Lord have mercy.
So
that was my confession and my question.
Okay, I'm glad you asked this because actually, I think that time period, the early '90s, or whenever seeker-oriented churches started.
Yeah, so think Willow Creek, Bill Hybels, Purpose-Driven Church, Rick Warren, that kind of stuff.
So in the 80s, right?
In the 80s, yeah.
So because of those huge churches and their church planting associations, a lot of us started churches.
Yep.
With, I mean, I believe truly
Yes.
our hearts were in the right place, but we did become this new kind of Pharisee. I really do think that God saved us from that. But there were moments that we would have, look at us. I mean, that we're human. Unfortunately, that's part of our DNA if we don't continuously look to Jesus. But I think Giant Church Incorporated is a result of that. It's kept going.
Yeah.
And nobody's pulled it back.
What
and
started
said,
in the
"Hey,
80s, it just looks a little different now.
It does.
Yeah. And you're getting more video venue kind
Yeah.
of Giant Church Incorporated that are going on now. Here's where I want to finish.
Yeah, and the whole spiritual abuse definition, just look up Wade Mullen. You'll find
Wade Mullen, spiritual abuse.
Yeah.
What Marie and I just referenced is what I want us to talk about at some length in episode 2, and it's collective narcissism. It's one thing if you have a narcissistic leader that's all about themselves, but in Giant Church Incorporated, you end up with what's called collective narcissism, where the whole group, using your word, becomes proud of our brand. And in one of the blog posts that I wrote several years ago, I asked the question, I wonder if we're more proud of our local church than we are of Jesus.
Yep.
So join us for episode 2. We'll follow up with more about what does spiritual abuse look like, but we'll also talk about this issue of collective narcissism so that you can better discern, hey, is that going on in my church right now?
Yeah.
Any last word from you, Marie?
If you want to read the series,
where can they find it?
livelikeitmatters.net, and you'll see at the top of the screen a drop down for Giant Church Incorporated.
And just interact with Marie on that. She's got tons of people that are interacting on that. And there's a lot of resources on her website as well that'll teach you more about spiritual abuse. So I hope you'll I hope you'll join us for episode 2 of why I left Giant Church Incorporated. Thanks for seeing today, watching, listening, hearing us.
Whatever you're doing.
Whatever it is you're doing.
Oh, that was fun.
Yeah, it was good.